Imagine this. You're sitting in a meeting, watching someone confidently explain a complex concept that you know with absolute certainty they've completely misunderstood. Their voice never wavers. Their posture radiates authority. Yet, everything they're saying is fundamentally catastrophically wrong. And the most disturbing part? They have no idea. Now, consider a more unsettling possibility. What if you are that person in someone else's meeting? The ancient Socratic paradox tells us that true wisdom begins with recognizing how little we actually know. Yet our minds rebel against this humility with frightening efficiency. We exist inside the prison of our own perception, a hermetically sealed chamber where the boundaries of our knowledge are precisely coterminous with the boundaries of our reality. You cannot know what you don't know. You cannot see your own blind spots. The territory beyond your cognitive horizon might as well not exist. This creates the most dangerous form of ignorance, meta-ignorance, being ignorant of your own ignorance. Think about your political beliefs for a moment, your ethical principles, your understanding of how economies function, how relationships work, how the human mind operates. How confident are you in these domains? And here's the razor's edge upon which everything balances. Is that confidence proportional to your actual expertise? The most troubling research in cognitive psychology suggests something profoundly disturbing, that your feeling of certainty bears almost no relationship to your actual competence. The less you know about a subject, the more likely you are to overestimate your understanding. The truly incompetent lack the very cognitive tools needed to recognize their incompetence. But here's where this dark mirror turns to face you directly. Intelligence offers no immunity. In fact, your intelligence might be your greatest vulnerability. The smarter you are, the more elaborate justifications you can construct for your pre-existing beliefs, the more skillfully you can dismiss contradictory evidence, and the more confidently you can persist in your delusions. What if the voice of certainty in your head, the one telling you right now that you're the exception to this rule, is precisely the voice you should distrust most? What if the feeling of being right is the most reliable indicator that you're wrong? The question isn't whether you suffer from this cognitive blindness. It's how severely, in which domains, and at what cost to your understanding of yourself and the world. The ultimate paradox awaits. To become truly intelligent, you must first understand how stupid you are. The hidden problem and its psychological philosophical roots, this cognitive blind spot, has a name, the Dunning-Kruger effect, but its roots reach far deeper than modern psychology can fully articulate. To understand why your mind betrays you, this way requires excavating layers of psychological architecture that have been accumulating since before humans developed language. Consider first the evolutionary perspective. Your brain wasn't designed for truth-seeking. It was designed for survival and reproduction. As Nietzsche provocatively suggested, we simply have no organ for knowledge, for truth. We know, or believe, or imagine, precisely as much as may be useful in the interest of the human herd. Your confidence isn't a measure of accuracy. It's a social tool evolved to persuade others and, crucially, to persuade yourself. This self-deception serves a deeper purpose. Schopenhauer observed that humans rarely act from rational deliberation, but instead are driven by unconscious will-making. Our rationalizations mere post hoc justifications for decisions we've already made. Your conscious mind functions less as the president of your mental republic and more as its press secretary, spinning plausible narratives about decisions made in chambers to which it has no access. The psychological architecture supporting this deception is intricate and robust. Carl Jung identified the shadow, those aspects of yourself that your ego refuses to acknowledge. The more vehemently you deny these shadows, the more powerfully they control you from the unconscious. Your intellectual blind spots function similarly. The areas where you are most confidently wrong are precisely those where your ego has the most at stake in maintaining its illusory competence. This is why intelligence often exacerbates rather than mitigates the problem. As Aldous Huxley noted, the more powerful and original a mind, the more it will incline towards the religion of solitude, or in this context, towards the isolated certainty of its own constructions. Your intelligence becomes a sophisticated defensive system, protecting your ego from the existential terror of recognizing its fundamental limitations. Societal forces compound these individual vulnerabilities. Modern information ecosystems function as confirmation machines, algorithmically reinforcing what you already believe. Social media has weaponized the natural human tendency toward tribalism, creating what Jean-Paul Sartre might recognize as bad faith, the self-deceptive attitude in which you identify so completely with your chosen intellectual tribe that questioning its orthodoxies feels like an attack on your very identity. The ultimate philosophical dilemma here was captured by Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. Yet, how can you exercise this freedom when you're trapped in cognitive patterns you cannot see? The prison of certainty is especially insidious because it feels like freedom. The walls of your cell are made of one-way mirrors that reflect back only what confirms your existing beliefs. Consider how your mind processes this very text. If you're nodding along, perhaps it's not because you're exempt from these biases, but because your ego has found a way to compartmentalize these insights, to believe they apply primarily to others. Your mind excels at creating intellectuals moats that separate what I know from what challenges what I know. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein understood this when he wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." The conceptual vocabulary available to you shapes what you can even perceive as knowable. This creates a paradox at the heart of intellectual humility. You need advanced understanding to recognize how limited your understanding is. This is why intellectual growth isn't a simple accumulation of facts, but rather a series of painful metamorphoses. Each genuine learning breakthrough requires the death of a previous certainty, a mini existential crisis where what you thought you knew dissolves into a more complex truth. The unseen consequences. These cognitive distortions aren't merely philosophical curiosities. They silently architect the structure of your daily experience, warping your perception at levels so fundamental you mistake them for objective reality. The consequences ripple outward, from personal disappointments to civilizational catastrophes. At the neurological level, your brain creates an intoxicating chemical reward system for maintaining your illusion. When information confirms your existing beliefs, your brain releases dopamine, the same neurotransmitter triggered by food, sex, and drugs. You are, quite literally, addicted to being right. Meanwhile, contradictory information activates the same brain regions associated with physical pain. Your neurochemistry has effectively bribed you to remain comfortably, confidently wrong. This neural architecture produces a constellation of cognitive biases that systematically distort your understanding. Confirmation bias ensures you notice evidence that supports your beliefs while remaining blind to contradictory data. Attribution error leads you to blame circumstances when you fail, but claim credit when you succeed, while reversing this pattern when judging others. The backfire effect actually strengthens your misconceptions when presented with corrective information. These aren't occasional glitches in an otherwise rational system. They are the system. The social consequences compound exponentially in your personal relationships. How often do you assume you understand someone else's motivations better than they do themselves? The illusion of asymmetric insight, the belief that you see through others while remaining mysteriously opaque to them, poisons intimacy and prevents genuine understanding. You mistake your simplified mental model of another person for their infinitely more complex reality. In professional settings, the least competent are often the most promotable, precisely because their unwarranted confidence reads as leadership. Studies consistently show that confidence is more convincing than accuracy, a reality that systematically elevates the wrong voices to positions of influence. The Dunning-Kruger effect thus creates a perverse meritocracy where the most self-deluded rise while the most knowledgeable hesitate. At the societal level, these dynamics create what economist Michael Gazzaniga calls idea bubbles, self-reinforcing ecosystems of thought that grow increasingly divorced from reality. Political polarization, for instance, isn't primarily about differing values, but about incompatible perceptions of fundamental facts. Two people can look at identical evidence and reach radically different conclusions while both feeling absolute certainty in their correctness. This isn't merely disagreement, it's cognitive apartheid. The historical cost of this cognitive blindness is staggering. Consider how many wars were launched by leaders absolutely certain of quick victory, how many economic collapses stemmed from experts confident in unsustainable models, how many scientific revolutions were delayed by the certainty of the established paradigm. As historian Barbara Tuchman documented in The March of Folly, civilizational disasters typically occur not despite human intelligence, but because of it. Specifically, because of intelligent people's capacity for sophisticated self-delusion. Even expertise offers limited protection. In fact, specialists are particularly vulnerable to what philosophers call epistemic trespassing, confidently applying expertise from one domain to questions in another where it doesn't apply. The physicist who pontificates about economics, the doctor who dismisses psychology, the business leader who redesigns education, all committing the same category error while remaining blind to their transgression. Most insidiously, these distortions create a feedback loop that corrupts the very tools designed to correct them. Education often paradoxically increases confidence without proportionally increasing competence. Critical thinking skills get weaponized to critique others' beliefs while fortifying your own. Even exposure to this very analysis might simply give you more sophisticated ways to identify these problems in everyone but yourself. The ultimate unseen consequence is the invisible ceiling these distortions place on your potential for growth. You cannot evolve beyond problems you cannot perceive. The boundaries of your understanding become the boundaries of your possibility. As philosopher Slavoj Žižek observes, the highest form of ideology is when you think you are outside of ideology. Similarly, the deepest form of cognitive imprisonment is believing you've already escaped. The rebellion. How to break free liberation begins with a radical act of intellectual surrender, not the passive surrender of nihilism, but the active surrender described by Eastern philosophers as beginner's mind, a deliberate emptying of the cup that is already full. This is no metaphorical suggestion. It requires systematically dismantling the architecture of certainty you've spent a lifetime constructing. Start with this counterintuitive practice. Actively seek out the strongest arguments against your most cherished beliefs, not the caricatured versions you can easily dismiss, but the most sophisticated challenges from the most thoughtful opponents. As philosopher John Stuart Mill insisted, he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. The true measure of understanding isn't how well you can articulate your position, but how accurately you can articulate the opposition's best case. This practice reveals an unexpected paradox. Genuine intellectual confidence comes not from the absence of doubt, but from its integration. Those who have truly mastered a domain, from Nobel laureates to chess grandmasters, typically express more uncertainty than novices. Their expertise isn't characterized by unwavering certainty, but by nuanced, probabilistic thinking. They've learned to inhabit the cognitive borderlands where knowledge touches the vast continent of the unknown. History provides models of this liberation. Richard Feynman, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century, structured his thinking around identifying his own ignorance. His famous notebook entry, "What I cannot create, I do not understand," reflects his commitment to never mistaking familiarity with comprehension. Socrates himself embraced the paradoxical wisdom of acknowledged ignorance, recognizing that the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. More practically, you can weaponize your cognitive biases against themselves. Create accountability, systems where you make specific, testable predictions about future events with explicit confidence. When reality delivers its verdict, calibrate accordingly. This practice, used by professional forecasters and super forecasters studied by Philip Tetlock, systematically punctures the illusion of understanding that your mind so readily manufactures. Even more radically, cultivate intellectual opponents rather than allies. Surround yourself with people who think differently, not as exercises in tolerance, but as essential cognitive correctives. The 19th century philosopher John Henry Newman observed that growth is the only evidence of life. Intellectual growth requires friction, the productive discomfort that comes from having your certainties challenged. The deeper rebellion requires something more profound, developing metacognitive awareness, thinking about how you think. This means learning to recognize the emotional signatures of cognitive biases as they occur. That flash of dismissive irritation when encountering contradictory information, that warm glow of righteousness when finding confirmatory evidence. These emotional reactions are your cognitive immune system, attempting to protect your existing beliefs. Once identified, these emotions become signals rather than drivers, indicators of where your thinking requires closer examination. Perhaps, most counterintuitively, embrace intellectual play. Serious thinkers from Einstein to Feynman recognized that playfulness, the willingness to temporarily entertain ideas without committing to them, is essential to breaking free from cognitive constraints. Try adopting perspectives you disagree with as temporary thinking experiments. What would the world look like if your opponents were completely right and you were completely wrong? This mental flexibility doesn't require abandoning your convictions. It requires holding them more provisionally. The ultimate rebellion isn't achieving perfect rationality, an impossible goal for minds evolved for survival rather than truth-seeking. Rather, it's developing a new relationship with your own thinking, more provisional, more curious, more humble. As Montaigne, the great essayist who pioneered intellectual humility, wrote, "What do I know?" This wasn't rhetorical deflection, but a genuine methodological question, one that opened rather than closed inquiry. The path to freedom starts with recognizing the nature of your prison, not just intellectually understanding these biases, but viscerally experiencing how they distort your perception in real time. Only then can you begin the lifelong practice of liberation. The ultimate truth, the most profound realization hiding beneath these layers of self-deception, is both liberating and terrifying. Your entire conscious experience, every perception, belief, and certainty, is fundamentally a controlled hallucination. Your brain, sealed inside the lightless vault of your skull, never directly experiences reality. It receives electrochemical signals from your senses and constructs a model of the world that has been optimized not for accuracy, but for utility. This isn't metaphorical. Neuroscientist Anil Seth describes consciousness as a controlled hallucination in which your brain's predictions about reality construct your experience more than your sensory input does. Your perception isn't a window onto reality, but a simulation built from prior beliefs, evolutionary shortcuts, and limited sensory data. Most of what you see is actually invented by your visual cortex. Most of what you know is constructed by similar processes. The implications are staggering. Not only do you not know as much as you think, you cannot know in the way you think you know. The very architecture of your consciousness precludes the objective perspective you implicitly assume you possess. You are not watching reality through a clear lens that might be wiped clean. You are generating reality through processes largely inaccessible to your awareness. And yet, paradoxically, this limitation contains the seeds of genuine wisdom. When you truly internalize the constructed nature of your perception, when you viscerally understand that your certainties are provisional models rather than direct access to truth, something remarkable happens. The desperate grip of ego loosens. The compulsive need to be right diminishes. You can hold your beliefs more lightly while pursuing truth more seriously. This is the ultimate integration, not the perfection of rationality, but the transcendence of the rational-irrational dichotomy itself. The wisest thinkers throughout history arrived at this same insight through different paths. Einstein's humility before the mysterious, Buddha's recognition of fundamental impermanence, Socrates' paradoxical wisdom of ignorance, all point to this same liberation through epistemic surrender. The true mark of intelligence emerges not as certainty, but as a particular quality of attention, a willingness to dwell in uncertainty without grasping for premature resolution, to cultivate comfort with the provisional nature of knowledge, to participate in reality with full awareness of your cognitive limitations without being paralyzed by them. This isn't merely an intellectual position, but a way of being. It manifests as genuine curiosity about perspectives that challenge you, compassion for others caught in their own cognitive prisons, and a kind of existential lightness that comes from holding your identity less rigidly. Your beliefs become tools rather than extensions of your ego. Being wrong becomes not a threat but an opportunity for evolution. Imagine moving through the world this way, each interaction an opportunity to update your understanding rather than confirm it. Each conversation a chance to glimpse reality through another's cognitive construction. Each moment of confusion not a failure, but an opening into greater clarity. The universe does not organize itself according to your conceptual categories. Reality exists in resolution far beyond what your cognitive apparatus can process. Every time you mistake your mental map for the territory, you sacrifice truth for comfort. Every time you embrace uncertainty, you open yourself to what philosopher Martin Heidegger called unconcealment, reality revealing itself beyond your projection. The ultimate choice is whether to live in the comfortable prison of unexamined certainty or in the unsettling freedom of perpetual discovery. The door has always been unlocked, but stepping through requires leaving something behind, the illusion that you ever stood on solid ground. What awaits on the other side isn't another form of certainty, but a more honest relationship with unknowing. In the end, perhaps true intelligence isn't what you know, but how you attend to what you cannot know. Not how confidently you speak, but how deeply you listen. Not how firmly you stand, but how gracefully you adapt when the ground shifts beneath your